Hi everyone, it's Chris and welcome back to another video. Thank you very much for joining me today. And for those of you who are new to the channel, well, welcome. It's lovely to have you along. And for those who've been here before, welcome back. Your continued support is hugely appreciated and never goes unnoticed. So thank you very much. And I'd love it if you don't subscribe, that this is the video that finally earns your subscription. Now, music has this incredible power to transport us, to take us back to a time and a place in our lives. And for me, one song, one melody, and suddenly I'm a child again. I'm at a party, I'm with friends, I'm on holiday. I'm on the beach in my hometown, I'm in the kitchen of the first home I remember as a child. So what about you? What are the songs for you? You know, the ones that really take you back to that moment in time when you were a child. Now, I have for many years loved collecting records. You can probably see that. I remember my first single, my first LP. I love the look of them. I love the feel of them. I love the covers. I love the aesthetic of being surrounded by lots of records, but for me it's always been about the music and the nostalgia that surrounds that music. Music isn't just sound, it's a memory, it's about creating emotions, it's a form of time travel. And today I want to share with you the music of my childhood, from birth to the age of 18, from 1963 to 1981. So this, ladies and gentlemen, is the soundtrack of my youth, not the records and songs that I think you might like to see, or the ones that I like now, but the ones that I remember from back along, the ones that evoke a memory, an emotion about a time and a place in my life. So I was born in 1963. I don't remember any music from that year, of course, but it was a reasonably significant year for music because we had the first Rolling Stones single, Come On, Chuck Berry cover. And a couple of days before my birthday, the Beatles brought out Please Please Me, which is one of my favourite of their early songs. But during sort of 63, 64, 65 into 66, I don't really remember much about music. Probably, though, the music that I remember is something probably around TV themes. So if I suddenly heard, you know, the themed music to things like Captain Scarlet and Thunderbirds, then yes, I would be transported back to that time. So I certainly remember those times and that kind of music. But between kind of 64 and 67, I don't really remember much. However, towards the end of the 60s, around about sort of 67-ish, when I was a preschooler, my sister was at school, my dad was at work, and I was just at home with my mum. I remember we used to have the radio on a lot in the kitchen, and it was a radio show. I think the guy's name was Jimmy Young. There always used to be a thing on it that says, "What's the recipe today, Jim?" So I think it was Jimmy Young on Radio 2. And there were certain songs that I just remember from this era because my mum used to sing them a lot. So, for example, Puppet on a String by Sandy Shaw, and Downtown by Petula Clark, and Nancy Sinatra's These Boots Are Made for Walking. I remember my mum singing those, and I do remember singing Release Me by Engelbert Humperdinck as well. Now, I've always thought until sort of 5 or 6 years ago that the first concert I ever went to was in 1974 with Status Quo. What a cool gig as your first one. No, I remember my mum, before she died about 5, 6, 7 years ago, telling me that the first concert I ever went to was in London. I don't know if it was Wembley, but it was Engelbert Humperdinck. And I actually have this vague recollection of being on the coach and also being in this big arena. So I don't know whereabouts it was in London, but Engelbert Humperdinck was my first gig. Now, in sort of 68 kind of time, I was really big into the war. In many ways, it wasn't that long, 20 odd years after the end of the Second World War, but I used to love these Commando magazines. My nan often used to buy me these. I used to love these, and I was really into war films. So the themes from war films are really etched in my memory. Here's a great example, 633 Squadron. That's a fantastic tune, and what a great film. And that, when I hear that, that takes me back to that time. In 1969, there was a significant world event that absolutely captivated me, and that was man first landing on the moon. I remember watching that live with my family, and I remember going to bed one night and looking up at the moon, and my mum said to me, "There's a man up there," and I still remember that moment. And there was a song in the charts at that time, which, you know, this guy's really, really famous. It didn't mean anything to me. I just loved the song because it was about space. And it was Space Oddity by David Bowie. And when I hear that song, that takes me back to those lunar landings back in the summer of 1969. in 1970, so I lived in Essex for the first sort of 6 years of my life, and then my family were relocated down to the south coast. So I kind of remember 1970 because it was vaguely traumatic having to leave the school I just really started at and some friends who lived nearby and relocate to a new place. And so some of the tunes I remember, for example, were Christie's Yellow River. I remember that one from 1970, and it was a massive hit for Mungo Jerry in the summertime. And I also remember watching my first ever, remember the first ever football match I remember, which was Chelsea versus Leeds in the FA Cup final. I think it went to a replay and Chelsea eventually won. But in the summer of 1970, England went to the World Cup. And because I came from Essex, I was a big West Ham fan, and Bobby Moore, Geoff Hurst and Martin Peters, well, they won the World Cup in '66. And in 1970, I was really into football. And England brought out a song, Back Home. And when I hear that, I am completely transported back to that moment in time. In 1971, I vaguely remember going to see my first James Bond film. It was Diamonds Are Forever, which I've got the single Shirley Bassey somewhere, so I can't find it, so I'll substitute it for the James Bond theme. But that song, again, takes me back to that time and that era when the first James Bond film I saw was Sean Connery. But there were some songs in the charts I also remember. So America's Horse with No Name, I remember. 'Cause I Love You by Slade, I remember. And, quite decent songs, but I also remember Johnny Reggae by the Piglets, which I think is something to do with Jonathan King. And also Ernie, the Fastest Milkman in the West by Benny Hill. That takes me back to the very early 70s, in this case 71. In 72, we started, my friends of my parents, they used to often have parties. We used to go around their house like New Year's Eve and things like that. And one of the family was really into Chuck Berry. So My Ding-a-Ling came out in 72, and that takes me back to that time. And Chuck Berry generally does, because a lot of people used to be dancing to Chuck Berry. But in 1972, I became much more aware of the charts. So I was 9 at the time. And things like Metal Guru by T-Rex springs to mind, and Hold Your Head Up by Argent, which I think is a fantastic song. And I had a friend down the road, his name was Keith, and his mum is a single parent, just lived with his mum, I think, and his sister, I think it was. But in her hallway, and it was unusual really, she had a giant picture of David Bowie and a giant picture of Rod Stewart, and she used to play a lot of Rod Stewart in her house. And in 1972 there's a song which I think is one of the best songs of 72, sung by Rod Stewart. I think this is an Australian band, Python Lee Jackson, In a Broken Dream. I think that is an absolutely amazing song. I'm not a big Rod Stewart fan, but it's a great vocal on there and some brilliant guitar. And that song takes me back to that era in my life. As does Crazy Horses by the Osmonds, which I think my sister really liked. And that kind of electro pop song, Popcorn by Hot Butter. I remember that song from 72, and possibly one of the first and synth pop classics really, Giorgio Moroder written Son of My Father by Chicory Tip. What a great song. Again, that transports me back to a certain time. And there was again some other family friends, and the son of these people, he was really into Alice Cooper. He was a little bit older than me, about 4 or 5 years older than me, but I loved School's Out, especially when school was out. So that's 1972. 73 was kind of a glam rock kind of time, wasn't it? And I do remember things like Blockbuster and Ballroom Blitz and those sorts of songs, Suzi Quattro, for example. I think David Bowie brought out this song in 73, Life on Mars, although it was an earlier song. I think it was a single in 73. I don't really remember that, but the one I do remember was a re-release of Laughing Gnome, so what an awful song. But again, when I hear that, it takes me right back to that time. I remember this melody as well, Sylvia by Focus. I love that song. I still do, actually. I think it's one of the greatest instrumentals of all time. I remember that from 73. And I'm not sure if this is 73 or 74, but I'm going to put it in 73. Another instrumental based on Third Stone from the Sun by Jimi Hendrix. It's Cozy Powell's Dance with the Devil on the Rack label, which was, a big label for glam at that time. Now, in our house, we had a few records. So here's one example. This is actually my mum's, which I nicked off her. I always remember that. I don't particularly remember the music, I just remember the cover. We also had these kinds of things in our house as well. The kind of, musicians playing and copying, hits of the day. And so I remember those. But we also had in our house, and I don't have a copy of it, but we had in our house the greatest hits of the Carpenters, which I didn't particularly like. But there was one song on it that came out in '73 that I thought was brilliant, and I still do really like it. Goodbye to Love, with a glorious guitar tone on it and a tremendous solo. I don't know who does the solo, but it's brilliant. Carpenters. And I also went to see another James Bond film, this time with Roger Moore, and that was Live and Let Die. I think it was his first film, possibly. But anyway, I remember the tune from that. Live and Let Die by Wings, one of the few songs I really like by Wings, that and Jet, probably. Into 74. At the back end of 73, around about that time anyway, I was really into martial arts. I started karate and judo quite young and continued that for quite a while. And so during 73 and 74, Kung Fu was really big in the UK, and I was really into Kung Fu because I did martial arts myself. And I do remember the music from Enter the Dragon, which that again just reminds me of that brilliant time. But a few people cashed in with this. So Carl Douglas, for example, Kung Fu Fighting, that takes me back to 74, as does the first single I ever owned. It was bought for me by my nan in my birthday, 1974, and it was Tiger Feet by Mud. And that is the same copy which I've had all that time, 50 odd years now. I also remember Sparks, This Town Ain't Big Enough for the Both of Us, and I remember seeing them on Top of the Pops and thought, why is Adolf Hitler playing the keyboards? And The Streak by Ray Stevens, novelty hit, terrible song, but that again takes me back to that time. I remember seeing ABBA win the Eurovision Song Contest with Waterloo. Again, that takes me back, and the whole family watching Eurovision. And I remember this song. This is a really sad song, and it reminds me for some reason of primary school, and I don't really know why. Maybe we played it at, I don't know, end of term parties or something. But it's Terry Jacks, Seasons in the Sun. And when I hear that, I am absolutely transported back to the mid-70s at primary school. It's incredible, the power of that song, amazing. In 1974, I saw, other than Engelbert Humperdinck, I saw my first live act. And that was Status Quo. I was only 11. I remember the smell. Found out later it was patchouli oil and dope. But I did buy a single not long after, and it's Down Down, which I think is possibly their only number one, but a fantastic tune. Again, that takes me back to 1974. 1975 was kind of a year for transition for me because I was ending middle school and going into secondary school. And whilst I was still into the charts, so things like Sailing by Rod Stewart and Sky High by Jigsaw, great little pop tune, and Make Me Smile, Come Up and See Me by Steve Harley and Cockney Rebel. But I was also, you've got to remember, I was also sort of 10, 11 at that time. And so I was into the novelty things like Funky Moped, Back with Magic Roundabout by Jasper Carrot. I remember that one. And number one in 1975 at Christmas, just about the time I'd gone, obviously, just to secondary school, was Bohemian Rhapsody. And I had a new friend at secondary school who had two older brothers, and they were really into rock music. And one of the albums that they had, which I then asked for Christmas in 1975, was this one, 24 Karat Purple, the first album I ever owned. What a fantastic album tone. And when I see that cover, not so much the songs, but when I see that cover, I'm taken back to my first year at secondary school. Okay, 1976. 1976 for me was much less about the charts and more about the kinds of the proper bands. So lots of older lads at school, we had those big Adidas holdalls, and I used to write and draw the logos of bands. Yes, Pink Floyd, Genesis, those sorts of things, Led Zeppelin. And I remember going into a newsagent's where they had a little box of records and buying a whole lot of Love. And for many years, I didn't realise, couple of years probably, I didn't realise that there was a middle section to Whole Lot of Love. I thought that was the song, and this is the edited version, which I think is much better than the album version. I also bought that year, although it's obviously not from 76, but I bought this, which is Paranoid by Black Sabbath, and it jumps at a certain point. And so for me, whenever I hear Paranoid, I think, why doesn't it jump? It always has. So anyway. But at that time also, so I was getting into albums, and so this was one of the albums that I bought in 1976. It's the first Led Zeppelin album I ever heard, and I loved it. Having said that, when I look at it now, I actually think I only ever used to play side one. I know there's probably a video in this. Albums that really have only got one good side. And for me, I know lots of Led Zeppelin fans will say side two is brilliant. I think side one is fantastic. I don't think I ever got to side two very much. But that was the first Led Zeppelin album that I ever bought. And when I hear Immigrant Song, I'm transported back to 1976. I also bought, I think I got this actually in the back end of 76. Again, I think it may have been for a Christmas present. But when I see this cover and open up the gatefold, not so much the music, much more about the cover. I am transported back to my early days at secondary school. Into 77. Now I've done a video on 77, and this was the year that music really took over in my life. I bought an album that year. This is Black Sabbath Greatest Hits with slightly textured sleeve. It's got the usual suspects on it, and again, it's not the music. If I hear the music, I'm not taken back, but that cover, I'm really taken back to 1977. But the songs that take me back to 77, this is probably my favourite year. And there are a lot of songs that when I hear them, I think they're brilliant songs, but I'm immediately transported back to being a 14-year-old. For example, God Save the Queen. I remember going to the Queen's Silver Jubilee celebrations in a little place called Broadstone in Edge of Pool, and setting fire to a Union Jack at the Jubilee while that was playing and pogoing. But my favourite song, the one that takes me back to 77, is Pretty Vacant. But other songs that do, This Perfect Day by the Saints, which is just perfect, I think. And although I'm not a massive Clash fan particularly, White Riot takes me back to that time, as does In the City by The Jam. I think that's a marvellous tune. I love that. And also Peaches, that takes me back. Not their best song, but again, it's probably one of my favourites because it takes me back to that time. As does, although I prefer Rockaway Beach, this is the first Ramones single I bought in the summer of 77. And when I hear that, I just think about 1977, as I do with Roadrunner by Jonathan Richman. But it wasn't just new wave I was into. So I Feel Loved by Donna Summer. I used to go to a disco called Bombers, which was in a place called Camford Heath in Poole. And that and things like La Belle Epoque and those sorts of things really remind me of those times. I was getting into John Peel in 1977. He used to play this song a lot. And when I hear Uptown Top Ranking by Alfie and Donna, I'm transported back to my bedroom listening to John Peel late at night. I loved Lido Shuffle by Boz Scaggs. Takes me back to 77, as does Dreams by Fleetwood Mac. I think that's just a brilliant song, and one of my favourite songs from 77 was undoubtedly Spanish Stroll by Mink DeVille, transported back to 77 just with a few bars of that song. I got into a bit of prog rock in 77. ELP, Fanfare for the Common Man, probably one of the only things I like by them, if I'm honest. Wondrous Stories by Yes, and that prompted me to buy the album that came from Going for the One. I also bought my first Rush single, Closer to the Heart, and I did actually see them at the back end of 1977. So 77 was a tremendous year. Let's look at 78. 78, I saw Blue Oyster Cult in 1978. I saw them at Bournemouth at Winter Gardens and immediately went out and bought this 12-inch single, which commemorates that particular tour in 78. I also bought On Your Feet or On Your Knees. I remember being in, so that was one 12-inch I bought in 78. Another one I bought in 78 was by AC/DC. I heard the song on the radio. Alan Freeman was playing it, and he loved it so much that he lifted the needle off towards the end and he put it on at the start. And I remember hearing that in Poole Park on someone's radio and going to buy it. And they didn't have the 7-inch. I had to buy the 12-inch, and that is still that copy. That takes me back to that moment in time, sitting on that hill in Poole Park, listening to Alan Freeman on the radio. So 78, songs that I really remember from that time. Thin Lizzy, Rosalie. Miss You by the Rolling Stones. One of my favourite songs by the Stones, really tapping into that kind of disco kind of sound that was big at the time. Sultans of Swing by Dire Straits, their first single, I think their best song. Just What I Needed by the Cars from their stellar debut. I love that song, but that takes me back to 1979 every single time. Sorry, 78. Is that a 79? I'm just thinking that's a 79 song, actually. That's in the wrong bit. That's in the wrong bit. Come back to that in a second. Baker Street by Jerry Rafferty. Again, transported back to 78. I remember going to discos at the tennis club down in Poole, and often used to play Davies on the Road Again. Oh, I love that song. Brilliant. That takes me back. And sort of some new wavy kind of stuff. Plastic Bertrand, Saint-Plan pour moi. Oh, what an absolute stellar song that is. I love that. And the novelty hit that was Jilted John, tremendous. Knew all the words for that, still do. And a new band on the block, Roxanne by The Police. Again, takes me back to 78. 79, The Cars, Just What I Needed, absolutely classic song. And I saw quite a few bands in 79. So I saw The Jam, I saw Rush, I saw Thin Lizzy, and briefly I saw Kate Bush as well. So she was touring and she came to Poole Arts Centre. Now, we had a little bit of a scam with the tickets and we managed to get in for free. And I walked out after about 4 songs. And the reason I've chose Man with a Child in His Eyes is I think that was the song that I walked out on, I think. I just thought she was a bit weird and I went to the pub next door. But anyway, I wish I hadn't now. But anyway, any other songs from 79 that really kind of evoke memories of that time. Message in a Bottle by The Police, that really does remind me of that time, as does Another Brick in the Wall by Pink Floyd. And when we used to go to parties, because we started going to parties around about that time, I was 16 after all, then Madness, One Step Beyond, and everyone used to do that dance all around the place. And in the summer of 79, Dance the Night Away by Van Halen. I just remember playing that single to death, as I did I Want You to Want Me by Cheap Trick, which I think is just one of the greatest kind of power pop rock songs ever committed to vinyl. And this is just a little bit niche because this is a local band to me in Poole, and if there is anybody from that area, you might be familiar with a band called Raw Deal, which liked the kind of Led Zeppelin-y kind of sound. They were a really good little local band, and this is Struck Down by Your Love, which again, when I hear that, I saw them several times in concert in local venues. Brilliant, great stuff they were. Okay, on to 1980, and I did a video on 1980 and why it might be the greatest year ever for rock. You know, I went to the Reading Festival in 80, and that was jam-packed, full of absolutely brilliant bands. And probably pretty much any of the bands that were on at this time take me back to this particular era. So Rory Gallagher, Crocus, Gillan, UFO, Iron Maiden, Pat Travers, Budgie, Girl, Tigers of Pantang. This was the new wave of British heavy metal. Slade played at that, and I just remember on August Bank Holiday, everyone singing Merry Christmas, everybody. It was absolutely bizarre. But in 1980, I saw AC/DC twice. This is a song that takes me back to that era, Touch Too Much. I was at Southampton in January 1980. At a concert that had been rescheduled from late 1979, and it works out it was Bon Scott's last ever concert. I feel really privileged to have been to that. I went to see them later in the year with the new singer Brian Johnson. It was a great concert. They were supported by Diamond Head. They were fantastic, but you know, not quite as good as they were with Bon Scott. Albums that remind me of this time. This compilation, Kilowatts, which has Frank Marino on it, Ted Nugent, Blue Oyster Cult, Journey, Shaking Street, Trust. That reminds me hugely of that time. And of course, it was the new wave of British heavy metal era. So Diamond Head's White Album, On Through the Night, and Iron Maiden. All those 3 albums make me think of this time, as does things like Neon Nights by Black Sabbath as well. I went to see them on that tour. It takes me back to 1980. But I also like stuff in the charts as well. So something I think was absolutely brilliant. Echo Beach by Martha and the Muffins, brilliant. And when I went to parties, everyone always used to love hearing Adam and the Ants. And in this case, that's Kings of the Wild Frontier. Into the last year, which was the year I was 18, 1981, transition year. I'd just done my A-levels. And I went on holiday that year, visit some relatives who lived in California, and picked up a whole load of singles. So things like Urgent by Foreigner, makes me think of 81, as does Stop Dragging My Heart Around by Stevie Nicks and Tom Petty, which I think is just a brilliant 45. Betty Davis Eyes by Kim Carnes, big hit for her in 81. Who's Crying Now, with the most beautiful melodic solo at the end of it. And Billy Squires' The Stroke, that takes me back to 81. And then I went to university and my musical taste started to change, because the stuff that was on the jukeboxes there was not necessarily stuff that I listened to, but I really got into things like The Ruts, Staring at the Rude Boys from 81, Pig Bag, and Papa's Got a Brand New Pig Bag. And although it's not from 81, but I don't think it is anyway, I think it's from 80, but A Forest by Cure, the greatest post-punk song ever. Teardrop Explodes, Reward, fantastic song. Show Me by Dexys Midnight Runners, just brilliant. And of course the song that really evokes that particular year and that particular time was absolutely brilliant, Ghost Town by The Specials. That, ladies and gentlemen, is the soundtrack of my youth. What are the songs that take you back to various points in your life? Thank you for watching, and thank you for leaving your comments, and thank you for your continued support. And I'm sure I'll be back sometime soon with another video. Cheers.